Hi everyone, and welcome to the iFormBuilder Essentials for Product Managers. I will be your host today, MJ Niscoda, and your presenter, as always, will be Barrett Johannesson. And then upcoming events, we have our October iFormBuilder certification classes coming up. If you aren't familiar with these, it's a great way to really have, not one-on-one, but an in-depth experience on how to learn the platform. I personally took it myself last year. It was one of the first classes. It's broken up into 2 sessions, 2 4-hour periods. Correct me if I'm wrong, Barrett.
Nope, that's correct.
Okay, 2 4-hour periods. Day 1 is, kind of slower. We really want to make sure we have, the foundation established on how iFormBuilder works. You're assigned a homework assignment, which will be graded. From there on day 2, we really start diving into, a little bit of JavaScript, conditional logic, really building smart forms. And for anyone that's really trying to, get a jump on mastering the iFormBuilder platform, I'd highly recommend taking the class.
All right. Well, MJ, thanks for that quick introduction. For those of you who are brand new to the iFormBuilder webinars, my name is Barrett Johannesson, and I will be your presenter today. If you're new, in the next 48 hours, we're going to send you an email with a recording of today's session. It'll be on a web page that will also have some additional resources. So as we go along and you're looking at this, you may notice that I have some links provided on some of these slides. And once the webinar is over and we send over the recording, you'll be able to access those slides and click on those links to get those resources and open them up. So just a high-level overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go through a iFormBuilder project manager checklist. So from start to finish, what does it look like to be in charge of managing an iFormBuilder project? If you're brand new to iFormBuilder, I think this is a great way to kind of organize how your project is deployed. If you've been using iFormBuilder for some time now, this might be a good way for you to look at the process that you've generated and you've created and to see if there's other ways that you can start maximizing your time and using the best or most of the platform. So we're also going to ask or talk about how to increase productivity with your projects and discuss some of the most recent releases. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to go through the iFormBuilder Project Manager checklist. And as we go through this, I am going to instruct you on different ways to use the platform and give you more details on how to actually perform these tasks. So the first thing that you should do whenever you are launching an iFormBuilder project is define and map your optimal workflow. So a lot of times when people are coming to iFormBuilder, they're just thinking about replacing their paper or their other data collection solution, and they're just looking for that mobile data collection. And so a lot of times it's just saying, okay, how can I get these questions onto a mobile device? And that's great, but we want you to think a little bit further than that. When are the users going to have access to the form? Who's actually going to be assigning the forms to the users' devices? Who's going to be creating the usernames? Does it make sense to have a white label app? And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But as well as once the mobile data collection is completed and I'm looking at the data, is it appearing the way that I want it to? Does it make sense for me to set up an integration with other web tools so that I can save my time and automate that and basically really create a more dynamic workflow where you don't have to have someone sitting at a computer day in and day out and taking that data and then changing that data so that it fits into another database and so on. So define what you want your workflow to be. That's the initial step. Most of us are used to that with projects, just defining your end goal. With that, after you've defined your optimal workflow, the next thing that I suggest that folks do is they set up a dedicated database environment with different company profiles. Now, if you haven't used iFormBuilder before, or you're not a current user, or if you're relatively new, you might be asking, well, what is a dedicated database? So this dedicated database has a unique URL, and it is for anyone who has a Growing Plus account. This allows groups to actually manage projects in a more advanced manner because you're able to separate users, forms, and data into what we call different company profiles. So each company company profile is its own separate entity, as I mentioned, so it hosts its own forms, data, and users, but as a server admin, you do have the ability to share forms and actually give other forms to other profiles. So each company profile you create could be using the same forms, but all the users and data is going to be separated. So it's going to make your life a little bit easier, as well as when you start handing out different tasks, you're able to create company admins for those different profiles. Another great use of the dedicated database is you're able to actually have a profile where you do all your testing and you build all your forms. That way, as you start deploying your projects in a more advanced rate, you know exactly where all your forms are located, and you can create form packages and share those forms from one profile to the next. So just to quickly show you what that looks like, as I mentioned, with your dedicated database, you do have a unique URL. So for mine, this is training.iFormBuilder.com. I have my own logos up here, and my color scheme is a little bit different than what you see in the everyday Form Builder app.iFormBuilder.com. Now within this dedicated database, I have this server admin tab where I have a lot of great functionality and customizations that I can do in the server info, which is really helpful as a project manager that I can customize that. But that's something we'll talk about a little bit later. What I wanted to focus on here is this ability to have the multiple profiles. So in my account, I actually have 158 different profiles. Now, the reason I have so many is because of the certification program. I give each user their own profile so they can have their own forms and data. But as a server admin, I can come in here and manage it and see what's going on with their project and assist them if they need it. What other organizations have done is they've actually created a different profile for each project that they have, or for each section of their company. So they may have an HR profile, or they have a profile that's for a project that is in North America, and then another one that's in Europe, and so on. So it's a great stepping stone as far as going forth and managing an iFormBuilder project. And if you have questions about a dedicated database, I would be happy to answer them, and I'm sure MJ would be happy to answer them as well.
Hey, Baird. Actually, just had a question come in about the dedicated database. Can you kind of break through the hierarchy of the dedicated database? You know, who has control of what, who has access to what, something of that nature?
So you kind of jumped the gun on me here, MJ. So perfect. I'm glad whoever asked that question that you did. So here's really the hierarchy of the dedicated database. So at the very top here, we have the server admin. And you can have as many server admins as you see fit. A lot of times, though, I do recommend being cautious of who you give server admin rights to, because you are giving them the keys to the kingdom. So they will be able to see all the company profiles that you have within your dedicated database, as well as have access to the API. If those of you on the call are unfamiliar with what the API is, the API allows for bidirectional data to flow from iFormBuilder into another database or another web tool. But going back to this hierarchy, so we start with the server admin managing the whole dedicated database. And then as you go forward, if you add, let's say you have 2 company profiles within your dedicated database. Each company profile you can then give someone a company admin rights for. Now you'll notice that these are 2 separate lines, and that's because if you have a username that's set up as a company admin in company profile 2, and you wanted to have that same user have access to company profile 1, they would need to have an additional username. So these are separated in that way. After you go under the company admin, that's where the company admin is able to give rights for anyone to have access to forms and to have access to collect data on certain forms, as well as view the data on certain forms. There's also the form builder, and I actually didn't have this here on the hierarchy, but the form builder is someone who's basically at the same level as the company admin, except they can't do any of the management of that company profile. They can only build forms within that profile.
Hey, Barrett, just had a question come in. How many profiles are you able to set up with inside a dedicated database?
As many usernames that you have. So if you have 50 usernames and you wanted to have one username in each profile, then you could have 50 profiles. So the profiles really are focused on how many users or usernames that you have available within your dedicated database. One thing I do want to note is if you do have a profile, and I'll just open one of these here and click Edit. If I go into this edit portion, I do have a drop-down menu that says active, inactive, and suspended. Now, if you're someone who's looking into potentially becoming a reseller, then suspended might come in handy. But for most folks, it's really focusing on the active and inactive. By making this profile inactive, this person or this profile can only be viewed as the server admin right now when it's listed as inactive. Moving forward, if this individual or the 3 licenses assigned to this profile tried to log in on their device or tried to log into the web portal, they wouldn't be able to. Only the server admin would be able to see it. And what is actually happening is this account is just basically frozen here, and no one is able to access it except for the server admin. If this project were to be active again and I still had 3 licenses available, I could turn it back so that it's live, and then that those individuals would be able to log in on their device and the web portal. So going on to our checklist. The third piece that we have on this checklist here is to create our users in these assigned profiles that we have and follow a naming convention and also give them correct permissions. So there's a lot of steps just within that user step that I just mentioned. So the first one is if you have a dedicated database, you want to make sure you're managing a specific company profile within that dedicated database so that you can then add users to that profile. Now, as we go forward, there are just some notes that I want to point out. And before I do that, actually, let's go back here to our control panel. If I were to go under, I'm actually already managing a specific profile, and now I'll go under the Users tab, Add and Edit Users. So this is where this next step takes place. So once you're adding a new user, if at any point you don't see that plus new button, then you actually have used all your licenses and you don't have enough licenses available to create a new username. And when that happens, just let your server admin know or let us know, and we can help allocate more licenses if you would like to purchase more. But going forward, some of the things to pay attention to when you create a new user, make sure you use the correct email address listed here, because that's the email address that's going to be used if they ever need to reset the password. Now, we understand that there are some projects out there where you're working in locations and with individuals who don't have email addresses. When that's the case, I suggest using the same email address as the company admin for that profile for resetting the password. Or if you have a support desk that you'd like to receive those emails and assist that person in resetting the password, then I would use that email address here. The next piece is that within iFormBuilder, when you're building your forms, we have some really helpful built-in functions. And these are called iFormBuilder built-in functions. And they actually call to the user details that you've created here within the username. So the 4 built-in functions that we have are going to call to the username, the first name, the last name, and the email address. So if you plan on using those, you want to make sure that you include the first name and last name in this user detail. The other piece I want to point out to you is when you're creating a user, make sure that you're using a naming convention and that you're following that naming convention for all the users within your profile. So whether it's the start of their email address or maybe the first initial and their last name, or if you're separating it by projects, maybe you want to have USA 1, USA 2, USA 3, and so on for the different usernames. But it is much easier to manage all your users if you have some sort of naming convention in place. You also want to be aware that when you create your username, it can never be edited, so you want to make sure spelling is set up correctly. But also pay attention to how your how you're typing that. Is it all uppercase or is it all lowercase? Because if it's all uppercase and then the user logs in all lowercase on their device, the first name and last name built-in functions won't actually trigger and work. And so that's where if you make the username all lowercase, tell the user to log in all lowercase to have those built-in functions for the name work properly. So the next piece of this that I mentioned is you want to make sure that you're actually allocating the correct permissions to the user when you're creating this username. So the first piece here, and I'll have this on one side and we'll go back to our users. This first permission, the right to create forms. If I were to check this box off, then I'm giving this individual the permission to create a form in this profile, so only within this profile, and they would only see the forms that they created. If I were to check off the box that says company admin, this individual would be able to perform all the management tasks as assigning forms to user, creating form packages, creating new users, kind of what we're doing right now. They would have that ability, except they wouldn't have the server admin tab and they wouldn't be able to build forms. If I were to check off both of these permissions, the right to create forms as well as the company admin, then this individual will be able to see all the forms within this specific profile, and they'll also be able to perform all the management tasks in this profile as well, except for, of course, the server admin. The reason we don't see the server admin checkbox here is because you can only add a new server admin when you're editing a username. Now, if I wanted to set up a user who's just supposed to be collecting data on their device, just using the iForm app, then I actually want to uncheck both of these boxes and leave this blank. So my end user, my data collector, they don't need any of these permissions. And I know that's a bit confusing at first, so it's just a quick note that I wanted to mention. The next piece that I want to point out to you as a project manager is that people can actually get locked out of their device and locked out of their iFormBuilder account. And this happens when they put the incorrect password in on their device 11 times. So when this happens and they contact you telling you that they've been locked out, then the way that you unlock them is by going under the User tab, Add and Edit Users. And in here, you'll see the status. And this is where if I had any of my users who are locked out of the environment, I would see that red icon here. If you see a red icon for the status, all you have to do is highlight the row and then click the unlock button that appears, and then change that person's password so that they can then log in again. If they're a company admin or a server admin, they'll be able to unlock their own account, but end users and form builders won't have that ability. So just to continue here with our checklist, our next one is, so we've defined our optimal workflow, we've set up our dedicated database, we've set up all of our users. The next is to create forms, and we're not just creating forms to replace the paper forms that we have, but we want to create forms that are following the iFormBuilder best practices. We want to make sure that we're building forms that are that can be used on both Android and iOS platforms. And we want to make sure that we build forms that are eliminating human error and the need for post-data cleansing. So when I talk about building it for the device type, we are actually, we've constantly been putting out Android releases if you've been following our release notes, but we are trying to make it so that both iOS and Android clients are completely compatible. So everything that you can do on an iPhone, you'll be able to do on a Samsung tablet. We're not quite there where they're mirror images, but we're getting much, much closer. And so that's why it's really important when you are building your forms that you're testing on both devices so that whatever the user is going to have access to, the form will work properly. Now, if you're not going to be the form builder yourself, then it's really important that you kind of pass on these tips to your whoever is going to be building those forms so that they are able to do it successfully and following the naming convention that you've outlined for them. And by following those standards, you're actually going to be able to expedite the form building process a little bit more. Another great tool that I suggest project managers create for their users, and especially their form builders, is a book of data column names that they use for specific elements. That way, later on, or even now, if you're going to be posting the data to other web services or other databases, you already have a naming convention set up. And eventually, down the road, maybe some of our customers will share with us what their naming conventions have been, and I can share that book with you. But for the time being, I just know that a lot of our really successful groups have created those books and those standards for their form builders. So some of the initial project considerations that you want to be aware of when you're starting a project is what devices will the end users have access to. You want to start thinking about the naming convention, as I just mentioned, that you want to use for the forms and for the option list. You want to almost map out how you want the form to be designed. So where do you want subforms to be included? What elements do you want to be used for each question type that you have? Now, you don't have to do that. A lot of folks will just go straight into the form builder itself and just start building. But when you are relatively new, it is kind of helpful to map out what you want, how you want it set up. With that, iFormBuilder has over 40 different element types, so it's important to be aware of those different element types so that you are actually using the correct one for the data that you're looking to capture. The last project consideration here is when you're looking at your forms and you're looking at the questions that you want to ask, you may want to look at some of the past data that you had and where the errors were, and then start thinking about how you can add form functionality so that you can eliminate those errors altogether and you start to have a standard with your data. That's where our option lists have really come in handy for a lot of groups because they're able to have a standard for the questions that they ask their users and responses, and they can quantify that a lot faster than if they just had a text response. So as we go forward, we have 3 form building golden rules. And so what I've done for you is I actually have a couple different images here, but I've really added a lot of text on these pages. Usually I don't have as much text during these webinars, but I wanted to just point out some of these pieces here and have it so that you can access this later on with all the details. But our first form building golden rule is make sure that you test your form, not just on the multiple devices, but always test before you've deployed your form to your users. So the worst thing in the world is creating a form and then not having your user base have the ability to actually collect data because you didn't test it. So make sure you test it, test on the different device type, and test on the smallest device. Our second form builder golden rule is to make sure that you use unique data column names that are database friendly. And I have a link to the words that you are considered reserved words that we don't recommend, well, that you can't actually save your form using. Now you'll see that I have 2 screenshots here, one on the left and one on the right. The one on the left is using our classic form builder, where the one on the right is using and showing the error messages that we have with our beta form builder 2.0. Now, if you're brand new and you haven't become an iForm Builder user yet, it is really exciting that we are going from our older version of iForm Builder into our Form Builder 2.0 because there's some additional functionality that it brings. And our third form building golden rule is to make sure you do not change the element input type, the data size, or the element encryption on a live form because it will delete the data. So anything that had been previously collected by the users would be lost if you were to make those changes to a form and all your data was still staying in iFormBuilder. I've also mapped out how you'd edit the live option list. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but again, if you are someone who is a form builder or you are going to be giving off that responsibility to other form builders, make sure that they're aware of these different best practices with our option list and with our golden rules.
Hey, Barrett.
Yep.
I just had a pretty interesting question come in. Should we expect the iForm will be capable to print out element properties such as label, data column name, description? This will help in developing data dictionaries.
Sure. So what I can show you with the Form Builder 2.0, just bear with me here. So if you haven't noticed, once you log into your iFormBuilder account, you do have both FormBuilder Beta and FormBuilder available. Every time you select the beta, it does open up a new window. In this new, our FormBuilder 2.0 and our beta, I'll just select one of these forms that I want to open here.
Also, Barrett, while you're going through there, is it possible to have a printout of the whole survey as a paper-based one?
That's a great question. As of right now, the only way to really do a printout, what I've actually done is I have just created a record, removed the responses, and then printed it from there, saved it as a PDF, and then shared it that way. But as it stands, how we have it set up, not necessarily or not really. So in the FormBuilder 2.0, we have a couple different interfaces that you have here. And this is the one that it always defaults to, but we also have one called a list view. And in this list view, you're able to define what you're seeing in this table. So one of the questions was, following that naming convention, seeing that data type. Well, already you can see this information here. You can also, if you wanted to add more to this table, let's say I wanted to also see any dynamic value or condition value that was added to some of these elements, then I can set that up to view it in this table. Now, when it comes to actually exporting this data, I'm not sure of any other way of just taking screenshots or just by selecting it and then copying it and pasting it into another file, unfortunately. But moving forward, I know that there has been talk about setting up a way that you can quickly see the elements that you have and see what the data column names are for them. I also know that there's been talk about having a way to be able to see what a parent form is and what subforms are attached to that parent form and essentially the form workflow mapped out as well. So there are some things that we've been talking about internally with this new form builder that I hope to see in the future. And for that individual who is looking to try to find a way to see all this information, I hope that this is helpful. So on to, as we continue, I mentioned that it's really important that you build smart forms. So what are they? They eliminate the error. They eliminate that need for data cleansing. They use elements like our option list, the range, our counter widget. They could use masks with our masking widgets. And they include descriptions for questions that have longer. They used the description fields for questions that are a bit longer. And for those of you who are unaware of the description field that I'm referring to, if I go back to the form builder, and if I'm in the new form builder, I'll go to this interface here. We have this section called description. Now on any text field, number field, in our email widget, as well as some of the masking widgets, if you type the description or you type your longer question in this description, it'll actually appear on the user's device as well. Previously, that was only available on iOS, but with the most recent release, this is also available on Android. So I was really excited about that. And for those of you who are Android users, hopefully you're excited about that too. And how do you eliminate error with smart forms? So you use those more advanced input types that I just talked about. You could also use our barcode scanner widget, which is the Manatee Works. You can use our third-party app, which allows you to call to other apps located on the user's device. You can also use a third-party app with our URL scheme so that you can connect and pass data from other apps. Maybe you have another app that you've developed in-house and you want to connect it with iFormBuilder. You can do that with the third-party app and the URL scheme. Other ways that you eliminate error and you build smart forms is by using our smart controls. So our smart controls allow you to use basic JavaScript and place that JavaScript within your form, and so that you can create it so that a question doesn't appear unless the user responds in a certain way. Or you want to make it so that a user can't submit a record until they respond with a number between 1 or 10 or whatever it may be. The smart controls really allow you to do that. Other ways to add additional functionality and create smarter forms is by using our location element and maybe parsing out the latitude and longitude data into other fields so that it can integrate with other web tools or mapping tools seamlessly. You can use what we call segmented option lists. So with segmented option lists, you're able to set up more than one option list, and based off of what the user selects in option list A will change on the options that they see in option list B. So for instance, if I ask someone in option list A to choose their favorite dessert between ice cream and cookies, if they choose ice cream, then in option list B, it would just show them ice cream flavors. If they chose cookies, then in option list B, it would only show them cookie types. So with the segmented option list, you can really create a very dynamic workflow and cut down on error right away. The iFormBuilder built-in functions that I mentioned earlier, where you're able to call to the user's information, can be extremely helpful and pre-populate that in the form. You can also use some of the other iFormBuilder built-in functions that we have, which allow you to do aggregation as well as displaying a key value or a label from an option that's selected by the user. And the last one is with our Smart Table Search. So the Smart Table Search is hugely popular with our user base because it allows you to have essentially a database set up, and you can call to that database on the user's device, and then it'll pre-populate form fields based off of that selection or based off of what the users place in their form. So going on to our checklist. So let's just revisit this. We've mapped out our workflow. We've set up our dedicated database. We've created users in our account. We've now created the forms, and we've made sure that we've eliminated error. The next step is to assign our forms to our users. We also have form groups and user groups, which actually expedite the process even more. So whenever you are, let me jump out here. Whenever you are going and you're assigning a form to a user, if it's just one form to one user, it's a relatively simple process and it doesn't take many steps at all. It's just going under the Forms tab, Form Assignment, and selecting the form that you want to assign to the user, and then clicking the Assign button. Now you'll notice that I do have a naming convention in my forms, and that's because if you're new to iFormBuilder, iFormBuilder allows you to attach to other forms what we call subforms, which is essentially we have a parent-child relationship, and that top layer form is what the user is going to see on their device, but you can have multiple subforms attached to that parent form. So when it comes to assigning forms to your users, you only need to assign that parent form, that top layer. And when you're assigning forms, you actually aren't just choosing if they're going to have access to that form on their device. You're also choosing if they're going to have access to view the data here on the web portal or on their device. So when I look at this, I have the collect or view rights. If I choose collect for a user, that's saying that they can access this form and complete a record on their device. If I just have view checked off, then they're only able to view the data here under the Data tab, or if they're using the Manage app within iForm. If you check off both, then they'll be able to do both those tasks here. Now, when you look at this list, I have all my individual users, but I also have a large amount of names that start with group. So these are all user groups, and user groups allow you to put multiple users in one group and then assign them all together like you see here. If you want to create a new user group, it's done by going under the user tab and then selecting user group from there. And once you created the group, you'll see that all mine start with group. That's just my name and convention. But if I go in there, I can select all the different users that are going to be a part of this user group. So for instance, if I want to have a user group for all my admins, and I want to have a user group for all the managers, or maybe just a user group for all the data collectors, I can separate them here into these user groups so that I don't have to worry about missing someone when I'm actually going in and doing the assignments here. And if you have over 100 users and you're trying to assign each one independently, it's more likely that you're going to make a mistake and miss somebody if you don't put them into a user group. So as a project manager, the next thing I want to do is, after I've created a user group, is I also want to create a form group. So the form group takes on the same idea as the user group, where you're able to take multiple forms and put it in one group so that it can all be assigned together. So I have a group that I've already created called Form Assignments. And if I go in here, then I'm able to see a list of all the different forms that I have within this account, and I can assign just the ones that are considered my form assignments. And I only want to select the top layer of the form, so every form that has _P at the end, I know is the top layer, and all that the subforms would come with it. So once I've created my user group and my form group, then I'm going to go into that same process that I went through before when I was assigning the individual user, and I'll go under the form assignment. But this time, instead of selecting individual form, I'm going to select my form group. So I highlight that row and then click the Assign button. And now I can come in here and I see all the different user groups, and I can give collect and view rights for my managers. Any questions on that, MJ?
Not so far, Barrett.
All right. And the next step we have here is to build integrations. So now we've set up all of the forms, we've set up the users, we've assigned it out to everybody so that they have access to it, but we may want the data to flow to a specific web tool or another database, and that's where this next step comes into play. You may not have actually wanted to assign the forms until you set this up, depending on your workflow. So the first is just talking about using iFormBuilder post for integration. So the iFormBuilder post allows you to set up a URL, and every time a record is submitted for that particular form, it's going to post that record data to the URL that you have set up in our post assignment section. And this is done actually in the form assignment that we were just in. So in this, I've kind of broken down what it looks like for the post URL, so you can use a JSON or an XML. If you're integrating with other web tools, as I mentioned, this is the best route to go. And a lot of those other web tools will actually give you an endpoint URL, and all you have to do is copy and paste it here into your iFormBuilder form assignment. Just giving some examples here of what it looks like when they do give you that post URL. So some groups will use the tool called WebMerge, which allows you to build custom PDFs. Once you've set up both WebMerge and your forms in iFormBuilder, then that's where you're able to get this merge URL, and that's what you'll paste within your post URL section. The other way to start this integration is with our custom web services and the API. So if you're wondering, well, what is this custom web service? This is allow you to have the bi-directional data flow. So if you have an internal database and an internal tool that you're using, and every time a new user is added there, you also want them added to iFormBuilder, well, this is where the API can really come in handy. This is just some examples of what it can do. So you can integrate data from multiple sources. It redefines your workflow, and it can be full task automation. So essentially everything that you can do manually with iFormBuilder, you can also do with the API. So you can cut people out of the project altogether. And I've actually seen some customers do this where they don't have anyone logging into the web interface. The only thing that they have them doing is collecting data on the iForm app. And based off of that data, it'll then trigger other actions to occur. Here are just some helpful links for you to get started if you're interested in learning more about using our API, and some other integration resources for you. on our checklist. After you've done all of that we've mentioned so far, then it's just time for you to sit back and observe your project's success. And one more thing is to just rinse and repeat for all your future projects. So once you've gone through this once, it becomes much, much easier for deploying your projects. And of course, once you do that, you'll probably see what naming conventions you're going to use moving forward, and the different user groups and how you want to set that up. So what else is there? So we've talked about a lot, but there are some things that are really important that I haven't mentioned yet. The first is iFormBuilder actually has 3 different iForm apps that are available for our customers to use. So it's important that you understand what those 3 are and to see which one's best for your projects. And it may change based off of what project you're working on. If you use the iForm kiosk app versus if you're going to use the iForm app. It's also really important that you understand how the iForm user license model works. So each username can be logged into up to 3 different devices at any given time. So that's great because let's say, I'm changing devices every day, or I usually use an iPad, I forgot my iPad at home, I can now use a tablet. But if I've logged into 3 different devices and I actually haven't manually logged out of any of them, then I would receive an error message saying maximum number of licenses reached. So as a project manager, it's important that you understand how the licenses work so that you advise your users accordingly on that. And if that happens to them, you can actually assist them from the web portal if they don't have those other devices available. Another thing that you can do with iForm is you can add localizations to your form. So language localization. This is extremely helpful if you are deploying a project to users in multiple parts of the world. You can add the translations and add the localization so that every time a device is set up to that specific language, it'll show that form in the translations that you placed. You can add report scoring. This can be very, very helpful if you're doing any kind of quick surveys on based off of the user's responses to option lists. You want to add a score. So that's where that can really come in handy. You can always configure your dedicated database, add some branding to it, add an email host so that it doesn't say that your emails are coming from iFormBuilder.com. You can edit the navigation tabs and a lot more when you have a dedicated database. Under the server info, there's a good amount of configuration that you can do. If you don't have a company, or if you don't have a dedicated database, or if you want to actually customize the company info in each profile within your dedicated database, then I think that can be very impactful for your project success because you're able to add your own branding to those email alerts. You can also set up different media configurations and media storage so that all your images are located in one spot. You can add and change the color scheme that you see within the iForm app. The next is with form packages. I strongly suggest that you become familiar with using form packages, not only so that you can share those forms with other people in your organization or even other people who have iFormBuilder accounts, but also form packages can be really helpful for taking backups of the form that you've built. This way, if you go and make major changes and you realize that you shouldn't have made those, that you can then import the old design of the form and have access to it. We also have data filters and storage filters. So when it comes to exporting that data, if you do plan on manually exporting it instead of adding the integrations, then if you ever have to look for a specific response, the data filters can be extremely helpful with that. We offer a white label program. So for those of you who are new to iForm and you're thinking about how you'd want to actually customize it so the app looks more like it's your internal team instead of having the iForm app logo that you see here, then let us know and we'd be happy to send you more information on that. I know that was a long list and I talked really fast. So MJ, is there anything for that?
Nothing has come through, Barrett, no. All
right, well, hopefully nobody fell asleep on me. So other ways to increase productivity. So Zerion Software and iFormBuilder, we have a lot of different support tools for you. So please let us know if you need anything and what you're looking for having support in. I also urge you to follow our release notes. We used to just have one area to follow for the release notes, but now you can choose if you want to follow release notes on iFormBuilder, on Android, on iOS, as well as on the Dataflow. And if you are looking to follow those release notes, then let me just show you where that's located. So here's our Customer Success Center. I've already logged in, but if you haven't logged in, and you haven't created an account for yourself, there is a sign in button in the top corner, and once you hit sign in, you'll see where it says sign up. But now let's say I want to follow specific articles on the data flows, so the release notes on the data flows. So I select that icon, and I see here the Zerion data flow release notes, and now I can just check this button to follow all the new articles that come out here. Now that I'm following these release notes, every single time a new release comes out for our data flows, then I'll receive an email letting me know what those releases are. Another way to increase productivity, which we've already talked about, is through that data integration by building custom workflows. Also by training. Training is huge. I'm not just saying that because I do perform training here at Zerion, but it's a huge part of your success. You know, your users need to be able to know how to use the iForm app, even though it is relatively simple. They need to make sure that they're trained on FormBuilder, or make sure that they're trained on admin tasks and whatnot to make sure that your project is deployed successfully. Creating documentation or using our documentation also will increase that productivity. The naming conventions, I've already mentioned that enough times today, so I don't think you need to hear me talk about that anymore. But the last way that I have listed to increase productivity is you can have the Zerion team, or you yourself can create training materials that include a getting started form, so that you can assign that to every single user who is getting started within iForm, and they can become more familiar with how to use the app within that form. You can also have a place for them to actually submit tickets to you or submit emails to you through that form, so that you can support them from afar. Another way to increase productivity is through Zerion's Dataflow automation. And as you saw just moments ago, I was following these articles. But what you're able to do with the Zerion Dataflow automation is you're able to build these custom data flows, and based off of actions that come in through these data flows, you can trigger different responses or different actions. So I may have it so that I'm having data come in from iForm, and I'm doing an inspection. If that inspection fails, then I want a record or report generated in a PDF. I want data posted to a dashboard, but I also want that record to be reassigned to another user within iFormBuilder. So with the Zerion Dataflow automation, you can set this up once, and then once you have it set up, all of that will be automated, and you'll be able to come in here and see your reports, see your dashboards, and whatever else it may be. Another way to increase productivity is with the Zerion identity and management. And this is something that we're still working on, so it's out there, but it's still relatively new. But with this, you're able to give out more granular permissions within what we call ZIM. So you're able to fully define what the user is able to see, what data they have access to, as well as what they can do with that data that they see. And then we go into other ways to increase productivity with some of the most notable releases that we've had here with iFormBuilder. We have it so that we have our post labels, that you're able to actually see the labels with the post data. We have our dynamic email subject line, the image metadata, and some of these other ones. I don't want to take up too much of your time here, but all of these are links to different articles that we have within our Customer Success Center if you want to learn more about some of these releases. I also have a link for our Form Builder 2.0, as well as a link to a video from our last Feature Frenzy. There was a request, and I'll just open it here. But the request was for a smart table search with an option list attached to it. And so this is a video where you're able to come and see what that actually looks like and how it will function. And now I've come to the end here. Here are some additional links to the different support tools that we have, our release notes, any project services that you may be interested in, a link to our certification and our ebooks, as well as to our community forum. And MJ, are there any other questions?
No, Bear, it looks like you covered everything.
I think I covered more than enough, or maybe too much. But if there are any questions from those of you on today's session and they come up later, please feel free to reach out to myself or to MJ, and we're happy to answer them. I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule and being with us and learning more about iFormBuilder. So enjoy the rest of your day, enjoy the rest of your week, and thank you again.